This is the Marriage Podcast, and I'm your host, Alexandra Stockwell. I'm a physician turned relationship and intimacy expert, and I specialize in showing couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships. I myself have been married for 25 years. My husband and I have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing relationship. If you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place because I will show you how. Let's dive in. Hey everyone, this is Alexandra, and this is going to be an amazing conversation today because for those of you who heard our first conversation on launch day, released January 15th, when I spoke with Kristy, Arnett, and Andrew Moreno, it was just amazing. I felt like I actually had about 45 follow-up questions and there wasn't time to ask it. So I'm really excited to continue the conversation today. And in case you didn't get to hear that, I'm going to link to it in the show notes. So go back and catch it. But Kristy and Andrew, they've been together for, well, either 15 or 16 years, depending on whose memory you go by. I don't have my own opinion. And in the course of their marriage, they have grown so much. I feel like every story the two of you share, it's just rich with how to live authentically, face fears, and become something better than you could have pictured before. And I don't follow poker in a way that I can share stories about how you illustrate that in your poker life, but certainly in your marriage, the two of you have worked through infidelity to create something so exquisite and solid. And the way you look at one another when speaking, it's so amazing. And we're going to talk about something else. But first, let's have the two of you introduce yourselves. What would you like our listeners to know about you personally and professionally?
Yeah, so I'm Andrew. I'm Kristy's husband, 37 years old. And yeah, as you mentioned, we've been together for a solid 16 years. And one of the things that really comes to mind when I think about our relationship as a whole is just really a story, like a comeback story and a story of perseverance. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about our relationship. And I think a thing in life in general is when you are faced with adversity, I think is the first time you're really able to start to shape who you're going to become in this world. And we had a very adverse time, a lot of turbulence in our relationship over that 16 years. And I think going through that was absolutely necessary to get to where we were. I think if we had not faced the adversity that we did with the infidelity specifically, I question whether we would be here today and how happy we would be, because I think when everything was just at its most chaotic, we were able to really have all the pieces on the table and just like sift through what was there and figure out how and why to put the pieces back together.
Definitely. And as you mentioned, poker, our first date was to a poker game, and it's been one of the things that has weaved through our 16 years together as professional poker players. And poker taught us a lot about risk. And when we were going through our really tough time, it took us leaning on everything that we knew and had learned about risk to rebuild and forgive and to trust again. And I couldn't agree more with what Andrew said about how the adversity forges, or is at least the opportunity to forge who you're meant to be. And every day I'm so grateful for what we've been through. It was the hardest thing that I'd ever been through, that like up to that point. And I think that now looking back, to have a successful marriage, to have one better than you could have ever imagined, it requires that you individually know who you are. And at least that's true for me. And that was such the opportunity to figure out how I could be happy on my own and in the relationship. And so now I couldn't even imagine life without having been through that. I'm so grateful all the time. I don't even know how.
It's just amazing to hear you speak. And I feel like when you talk about needing to know who you are, Kristy, there's a kind of energetic transmission. So it feels really clear when you say it. And yet, if someone is listening and they want to know who they really are in order to find the key to happiness and a successful marriage, it actually then becomes sort of vague. And you're a very practical person. So, would you kind of dial it in for someone who's like, I want to even comprehend what that means to know who I am? What would you say?
One of the most specific examples that I think I can share, and hopefully this gets to the point or conveys it in a way that is meaningful, but when before the infidelity, there was a period of time where I could tell that we felt like there was this space that was growing between us. It didn't mean that we didn't love each other. It didn't mean that we were very wanting the other person to be happy, but it did, there was a sense that there was some space. And when we would get in fights, one of the things that he would say is, I feel like you're not listening, or you're just like not really there. And in my mind, like at the time, I was so defensive. I was like, what do you mean? I heard what you said. Like I could repeat everything that you're saying. And this wasn't the first time I had that feedback of I was distracted. I struggled a lot with anxiety and social anxiety and just being super, super stressed and super anxious. And I didn't really draw these things together. I didn't really see how my anxiety and stress could make other people around me feel like I wasn't really there. And instead of facing those things, which was the opportunity at the time, everything was good enough. And until the thing blew up, our marriage blew up and we were at the brink of divorce, and we really had nothing to lose. So I could either, if I really wanted to take a look at myself in the marriage, I was going to have to take a look at my own responsibility in the matter and my own contribution to what had occurred. And so that was one of the biggest things that I held on to. I was like, am I not a good listener? Or people around me don't feel like I'm with them? That's a problem. And so I worked on that so much. And I asked some of the best listeners I knew, I was like, how did you get there? Like, how are you such a good listener? And it was like practice and all of these things. And I think now one of the pieces of feedback I get is that people are like, you are such a good listener. Sometimes it's so intense how hard you're listening. I'm like, yes, that's what I want. But it's made all of my relationships better. It's made me more in tune with who I am and what I want. And I know we talked about this in like the 10-minute episode of how I can be very, practical and not connected to my feelings. And that's something that Andrew's taught me and I've worked on. And also, just briefly, this is something I admire so much about Andrew, but at the time I was resistant to, which is he's always been so empathetic and so relationship driven and so loving, but it wasn't something that I knew how to receive. So that was also the opportunity to come full circle and learn that. And yeah, that's just one example of how it was the opportunity to look at it. And one last thing is that, so sometimes it's hard because in some relationships, maybe the person who's, you're just a bad listener, you suck, or you like do this, maybe there isn't truth to it, or maybe there is. But what I think for us, the reason why I trusted his feedback is because we had so many years together as what's it called? Like a base, like a foundation.
There it is.
Yeah.
So it meant that you may have been defensive, but you also trusted that it was at least worth paying attention to the feedback you received. Okay, thank you for that amazing answer. And I really think one of the hallmarks of your relationship and each of you individually is an incredible generosity. And I see this in so many ways, both in how you interact with one another. Also, I've shared your story in my book, and the fact that you first of all made it available on the podcast that I first listened to when I got to know you, and we can have the link to that podcast in the show notes as well. But your generosity, both of you, in letting me share your story in my book, and the way that mostly Kristy and sometimes Andrew you share on social media is just fundamentally generous, so that any growth, happiness, joy, success that you each experience, it gets to be yours, and you also make it available for anyone who wants to learn from it. And in that context, from where I sit, it looks to me like the two of you have this amazing relationship to risk and adversity, and you let yourselves be sharpened in the heat of whatever challenge you face. And ultimately, in every single endeavor that I'm aware of, you have been profoundly and astonishingly successful. So whether it was navigating infidelity to create this incredible marriage, various risks you've taken in the poker context, the way that you've lived a nomadic lifestyle, really many different flavors and elements of life, you have brought your attention and tenacity and risk and created something astonishingly successful. And then there's this one area which all the usual skills didn't really produce results because there were more things at play. And I just feel so honored to be bringing up this topic. When you first suggested it, I just was filled with tears, as you both know, which I wiped away to have an intelligent conversation. And with that, I'd like to just lay out a loving, admiring, gentle, verbal red carpet for you to share what it is that I'm referring to and what your journey has been.
Yeah, for me, as we spoke, Kristy and I were discussing kind of off camera some of the things we wanted to talk about, and in the vein of it, fighting through things and adversity and all of the challenges that come with a long 16-year relationship. Once we made it through the infidelity and we got on the right track and really had a clear vision of where we wanted our relationship to go, we knew that having children was going to be something that we were both not only ready for, but just had always both wanted. And yeah, so we've been trying for a good 5 years, and we miscarried once after a year or two of trying, and then we were trying IVF. So we were in the final stages. We had a couple embryos and we were excited to do the transfer. And then basically the week before the transfer, we found out that we got pregnant naturally, which was like, has been a celebration and a feeling of triumph, but very quickly. And I think why I think this is good to talk about is that these things aren't just linear, where you're like, okay, this happened, now this is good, and boom, all these checkpoints. There's always the fear of what if we miscarry, or when's too soon to tell people. And I think for her and I, discussing some of this stuff, that in the context of a healthy relationship that is able to navigate these difficult conversations and tough feelings around all of this, I think it's just a worthwhile conversation to have. So yeah, we're still very new as far as like finding out, but we're both very excited and very hopeful and positive that it's going to result in a beautiful baby.
Yeah. Oh, it's one of those things, and Brene Brown talks a lot about this, which is how sometimes the fear can just steal the joy. And both of us are really conscious of trying not to let the fear of something bad happening steal what joy this is, because I think after 5 years of wanting something so bad, it weighs heavy for sure. But what you said, Alexandra, is so true, which is this isn't one of those things that you can just really commit and work hard at and improve and get better. It is in some ways. You can do the IVF, you can save up the money, you can take all the prescriptions and do all the shots, but it is a practice of also letting go which is really hard for me, as all of the other stories illustrate. But just yesterday we saw the heartbeat, and it's so funny because his immediate reaction is relief and happiness, and mine was like, why isn't the heart rate higher? Or like, why is it measuring? But the doctor said it was fine. And then I immediately, once we got in the car, I wanted to take my phone out and look up all the baby forums, all the doctors, what do they say about this heart rate? Like, where is the heart rate exactly, so that I can know, this is my poker mind thinking, what's the probability of this not going well or whatever. And Andrew was just like, okay, let's get on this. He's okay, let's get on the same page. And what did you say?
I took a page out of what I know from poker, which I think is like really valuable in life, which is what I was leaning on after the ultrasound, which is you do all the research beforehand. We got the best doctor and we trust the experts. And in poker, how that looks is you study, you prepare, you make all of your adjustments before you sit down at the poker table, and then you do the best that you can in the game. And then when all of the money is all in, so I put all my money in, I bet all my money, and my opponent's money is all in, the rest, the numerical factor of it, the odds, it's all up to the universe. Like we have no hand in that. Like we already did our part. We've already done our research and we have the experts to tell us what to do. And I find oftentimes we get spun up in things that we can't control. And a way that I help myself from spinning into those things is making sure that I'm doing the correct work beforehand. And I think it really brings me comfort in this case because I think we have a great doctor and I think he really knows what he's doing, and he's telling us what supplements to take, what hormones to take, when to back those off and when to increase those. And outside of that, like we've already made our bet. I think that's helped me in that case and has also helped me in poker and in life.
Yeah, and then letting go, and of course, not spinning and stressing and finding all these forums of like people talking about their experience, which isn't actually applicable to me, but I'm just trying to find my way out of this anxiousness, which is a never-ending hole when you start looking on the internet. Like I thought that was good. So it's definitely been a practice for me to let go.
It's so amazing to hear that. And I'm going to share two things. One, which I know from practicing medicine as well as my lived experience with people I know, that one of the most challenging transitions in a journey like yours, where actually you're spared this in some regard, so let me explain myself. When a couple conceives through IVF or any kind of highly medical intervention is needed during the pregnancy, it is a really big challenge, like pivoting a tugboat, to be able to then shift into trusting yourself and your maternal and paternal instincts and your biology and like the wisdom of the centuries of being a Homo sapien. For someone who just spontaneously conceives without even trying, it's easier to just trust that your body knows what it needs to do. So that's not your situation because you've conceived spontaneously, naturally. I'm not sure what the proper word is, but before having any transfer, your child was conceived in sex. And yet, because of the infertility journey being what it is, it's very tempting to feel that your relationship to the pregnancy ends up being mediated through medicine. Any comments or response to that?
Yeah, I think also because I think about all the reasons it may have gone wrong before. And also, since we're still working with our reproductive endocrinologist, he is checking we're not going about it as if we conceived naturally. We're going about it actually in the same process as if we had conceived with IVF. So we're doing like tons of blood work. We're supplementing with lots of hormones. So it still feels, and we're still in that mindset of still trying to correct things that may have gone wrong before, which makes me think about things that may go wrong, I think.
I just want to plant a seed as an invitation for when it feels right to shift into trusting your body, which is collaborating with the doctor's input. I'm not in any way suggesting otherwise, and you're not asking me to, but I just think that is an extra developmental step on the way to parenthood that is asked of people who have a higher intervention conception and pregnancy. That's one thing I wanted to say. And then the other thing is, I think one of the most challenging things in the infertility journey, besides the infertility, is that the husband and the wife, the man and the woman, the mother and the father, whichever terms we want to use, they really experience the journey differently. And so even though it's a shared journey, it's uniquely yours, it can feel very isolating. But I don't smell that in what the two of you have shared. And I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I could say one thing that comes to mind. And as I was thinking about all this before, how we, what direction we wanted to go with the infertility topic. And I think the thing that's really important to me is that we have learned how to communicate and how to deal with adversity from many years. We've been training for this our whole relationship, and I think that's something that people aren't necessarily present to when they're maybe in an argument with their significant other, or something goes wrong, like the car breaks down or something with the finances. The way, one of my favorite quotes is really, I just think so true, is how you do anything is how you do everything. And I think when you start a relationship and you really focus on learning how to communicate and how to work through those things, it will continually show up in your relationship and help you through these difficult times. And for us, for the infertility, I think we have a really strong pattern in place of working through difficult conversations and communicating and listening that goes back many years and many challenging situations. So I think for anyone that's listening at home, I think it's a really good reminder to check in with yourself and think about, if you have a partner or not, how do you handle those? How are those arguments going at home? Are they explosive? Are you listening? Or are you, when you're triggered or when you're in your emotion, are you still able to listen? And it's so important to really focus and work on those in the smaller day-to-day arguments and situations that come up, because when the really big things come up, you're very likely going to react in the same way and in the same patterns. And I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, like, we trained for this. Like, we trained every day, 10, 15, 20 times a day when things were going wrong for a very good stretch for many years. And I think people should just be more present to that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Because there were times where we could have gone down different separate paths in this infertility journey, where I felt like I was alone, or he felt like he wasn't contributing, or whatever these things were. But we had those conversations and they were tough, and a couple of them were arguments. But because we'd learned how, and if I could just say specifically how, like, it's, the first time when we had a miscarriage, it was fascinating to me, because what happened is that it was one of the first times where he really leaned into the pain. If I could just speak, and you can and speak to it too, is like, one of the things that we both did when it came to difficult things, where I would just work harder, I would go to work, or he would withdraw. And when the miscarriage happened, we both came towards each other rather than apart. And we were both like, I remember we were like laying in the bed, and he was like, "This sucks." And I was like, "This sucks." Like, we were just like, and we're like, "But it's okay. It's okay. Life just sucks right now." And I just remember thinking, like, wow, this is so different than how we used to handle things. So I think, yeah, just to reiterate what you were saying, is in those small moments and the big moments, we have practice like turning towards each other.
Yeah, and it's okay for things to, like, be terrible. I think so many times like we're just trying to find a way out of it right away. And it's while the thing is happening, it's like the first instinct is to not be in it and to mentally leave for me, or physically leave. And that's why when you were saying this sucks, I'm just remembering like being in that pain with you and not trying to find a way out of it for that moment. And I think there's a lot of value in that, because not everything is meant to just be like, okay, like there's a problem here, I need to fix it, I can't feel this way right now, and we got to solve it. It's like, no, I'm allowed to feel like shit right now because this fucking sucks. This is, you know, how I remember feeling.
Yeah.
Pardon my language, but yeah.
And that gives me so much more trust too in this journey. And as it continues, because we're still so early, we're only like, at the time of this recording, we're only 6 weeks. But, you know, even yesterday, and if this pregnancy is for some reason not viable, like we'll get through it. We can still go back to IVF. And knowing that how we get through things before, I'm like, you're right, we will. So that's really helpful.
I just love so much hearing the two of you speak about this. I feel like it's such a gift, and it's the gift you give one another to have these conversations that you're giving me and anyone who's listening to have this conversation. And I definitely, when I teach communication skills and how to really connect in a very ensouled and sequential way, exactly what the two of you are talking about, I always say start with something small. Someone didn't do the dishes last night, or didn't put the cap on the toothpaste is the typical example. Like, navigate that so you both feel heard and connected, because it really is like going to the gym. You got to start with the weights that are less heavy in order to be able to really lift the big things. And you two are so elegant with lifting the big things in your communication. It's an honor. And I feel like I want to already invite you back for another conversation, but and maybe we will, maybe in a few months, but for now, anyone who wants to follow your journey, hear more about your pregnancy experience, and follow you personally and professionally, what's the best way to find the two of you?
For me, you can just search any social media, but mostly YouTube is where I'm focusing right now. But Kristy, Arnett, Moreno, definitely going to be sharing some stories and some what I call like video essays about our journey. And I've already got a few up there. And one of them is the story that you shared in the book. So you can find that in your book, Uncompromising Intimacy. Yeah, Kristy, Arnett, Moreno.
And I'll be popping in on your social media as I tend to do. And I'll also have at AMO for show, and I'm on Instagram sharing things about poker and life and philosophy, and I will be sharing more often.
Okay, that's so great. We'll include all of that in the show notes, as well as the video essay that you included me in, talking about the sensuality and intimacy in your relationship, because I just think...
Oh, yes. I'm so excited for that one. It's probably the one that I've been, most of my friends have been like hounding me about, like, when are you going to post that? So I'm really excited about that.
Okay, I'll definitely include a link. And I think it's just like Andrew said, how you do anything is how you do everything. So whether the topic is pregnancy or sensuality or poker or whatever it is, anyone listening, you can find more of this quality of fierce gentleness, kindness, and clarity that is part of any conversation with the two of you. So thank you so much for joining us here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Marriage Podcast. Please rate and review the show on iTunes. It really makes a difference. And if you have a question or a comment, reach out to me via my website at alexandrastockwell.com.